Chapter 5 saw the climax of the novel with the expulsion of Snowball and the establishing of Napoleon as the supreme and only ruler. Now we go very rapidly into the falling action. Napoleon continues to consolidate his power. It's now a matter of consolidating the power. He eliminates his enemies and he reinforces his status as a supreme leader. So that's where he now starts doing that, and that is going to lead to more and more falling actions. The animals at this point, look at where they are. They have to work extremely hard. They suffer difficulty in building this windmill that Napoleon has now claimed was his idea all along. But they suffer because they cannot use picks and crowbars. They are not human beings. So they have real difficulty handling these tools. And they also cannot stand on their hind legs. They find it impossible to work on hind legs and using these tools. However, they don't question what they're doing. They continue to obey the pigs, and they're still hoping for a better future. And in order for Napoleon to get them to work harder, to get this windmill on the go, he has to make use of threats. So you can see the subtle change now in the situation. He is consolidating his power. He is the supreme leader and he uses threats now. He is threatening to reduce their rations. Note how cruel that is, that he's going to take away their food if they don't volunteer to work even longer hours on the windmill. So the animals' cooperation is still fostered by a sense of the common enemy. The common enemy, the humans, that's always somewhere in the background, and it's also used as a threat. So there are more and more instances of coercion and deception by language. Remember, I've made several references to how language is used. And you're going to see how this is going to culminate to quite a substantial degree in the end. And that occurs in this chapter. What does Squealer do? He justifies Napoleon's actions. For instance, the threats and, the things. And he uses skillful but duplicitous reinterpretations. He starts reinterpreting the past, and he rephrases things, and he reinterprets the animalist principles that old Major laid down right at the beginning. And we are going to see a gradual but quite rapid rephrasing of the 7 commandments. And it's going to be altered. Remember, I said you must keep a list of these principles and take careful note of how they are changed. So the one thing, for instance, is they start with trade relations with human beings, which they were told in the beginning will never happen, right? And note how they use a human being, Mr. Whymper, to sort of hide this fact. He is the agent. He is just the go-between, so to speak. But ironically, he himself is a human being. So they do trade relations with human beings and make use of Mr. Whymper as a go-between. And then suddenly the animals also notice that the pigs have occupied the farmhouse, which they also said will never happen. And they enjoy the luxury of sleeping in beds. So changing the language, they also change what actually happens on the farm. So just a quick reminder, look at a few things. You're going to now see such a rapid reversal of the principles of animalism. Think of things like, you must not resemble man in any way. Look at how they're already starting to do that. They're sleeping in beds. They have relations with Mr. Whymper and other farmers. They must never live in a house, sleep in a bed, wear clothes, drink alcohol, and you're going to see all these things starting to happen, where the pigs are going to start resembling human beings in every respect. And what they said is all the habits of man are evil. But we see the pigs having hangovers, they drink whiskey, and the worst thing that we're going to see in terms of the reversal of these principles is what they said initially: no animal must ever tyrannize over his own kind. And we're going to see how that is going to happen. And that is the saddest thing of all, how they actually turn against each other and tyrannize the animals, even the pigs, in order to keep Napoleon in his position. So you will have remembered all of those things, and check out, we are going to look at how these principles are broken. We see how the pigs grant themselves more and more privileges, right? Is it equal for some to have more than others? All animals are equal. And in that way, by giving themselves these privileges, they contradict their professed concern for equality on the farm. Now, we're also going to trace what's going to happen to Boxer, this loyal, very hard worker, naive, innocent, like a prize animal, wonderful, I can almost say person. This Boxer is a wonderful character. So he's known for his commitment to his work. And the thing is, he is not that clever, and he has verbal reminders for him to keep going, to keep working even harder and harder. And he has two mottos: I will work harder. Whenever there's a problem, he just says, fine, whatever, I will just work harder. And then sometimes if he thinks something is perhaps not 100% right, he justifies the actions of the other pigs by applying his second motto: Napoleon is always right. So once he said that, he's satisfied and he can carry on. So look, for instance, also how language is used in changing these principles. By saying no animal may sleep in beds, they go and change it to with sheets. So can you see how they use language and in order to confuse the animals? They more or less keep it the way it was, but then they add this little tail to it, and suddenly the animals are confused as to whether it was always like that or just now. So, we can see that the power of the word, we've talked about language, the power of the word overrides any doubts based on individual thought. So in other words, individual thought is not allowed. It's just the words that bombard the animals and keep them confused. So in other words, the sad thing is, where language is supposed to be something that can emancipate perception, the animals distort even this concept, and they use the language to confine the perception of the general animals. So furthermore, another tactic that Napoleon uses is the bleating of the sheep. In other words, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And you can imagine them bleating this all the time. And that silences any dissent and the animals are quiet. They can't speak their minds because they are just shushed. So their objections are silenced also by words, but by a reduced idea or concept of using language. Now they also, if when the animals have the thought that they want to object against trading with human beings because they seem to remember something along those lines, Squealer now goes on to say, and he goes as far as to suggest that the supposed rule against such trade is a delusion. So he sells the concept to the animals that they are deluded. And so the confusion is now called delusion. So the animals actually believe, okay, so perhaps we are deluded. And he also accuses Snowball, right, for spreading these, according to him, lies. Remember the word, a fairy story, a pack of lies, spreading these lies, and which is, of course, in itself a huge lie, right? So he manages, Squealer manages through language to, these ways, to confuse the truth and falsehood. In other words, the animals cannot distinguish anymore between what is true and what is false because of the confusion the language brings. So the animals now, what they do, and that's important because they allow it. They allow words to determine their reality. In other words, what a thing is now called by the pigs is simply accepted by the animals. So they cannot define their own reality. It gets defined for them. So you see the blurring of truth and fibs throughout. So there's no evidence to support these new names given to things, for instance, but they just accept the words. So important to notice that individual insight is now replaced by group subservience. In other words, it's something like a mob culture. They just follow without thinking, right? And they accept official interpretations of events instead of defining it for themselves. Squealer also exploits the fear of the common enemy in justifying the privileges that the pigs have been giving themselves, and also to explain the slave-like labor that the animals have to do. He bolsters ridiculously weak arguments by once again appealing to the animals' emotions. Remember, Old Major also did that. Now they do the same because they know it works with the animals. So they appeal to their emotions. They say, if you don't do this, Jones might return. He also sort of starts this idea of this new common enemy. We see Snowball now because he's trying to tell the animals that Snowball is in league with the human beings. So Snowball also becomes part of the common enemy. And he gets blamed for everything that happens. For instance, Napoleon's reaction to the collapse of the windmill is that Squealer came in at night and did it, right? And then very soon, one of the animals actually gets some evidence that is true. So they just accept it, you see. So Snowball becomes a scapegoat, and just after that, then he orders the rebuilding. After their hard labor and the collapse of the windmill, he orders the rebuilding of the windmill, and it dampens the spirit of the animals. So Snowball now becomes part of the common enemy, and to counter Snowball's imagined plottings, the animals' unfaltering faith in Napoleon's wise leadership is demanded. So now that they've made Snowball part of the enemy, it's once again them versus us, and we have this wonderful leader. He is so wonderful, and we'll work harder and we'll please him because he is our icon. So we'll see what happens in the next chapter next time.